Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Coroner, a great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we have, the whole episode kind of dealing with a very tragic situation. There's a fire in this apartment building, and obviously some people ended up, because I think other people did die, but I think it was on this particular house ended up being the source of it and everything. I believe this one particular place was, and there was a body found, because it was that was the only body that was focused on. So maybe other people did manage to get out. I don't know, because it turns out this is dealing with a woman named Kelly who was trying to rush in when the fire was happening, because part of the building kind of exploded from some of the fire, and she tried to rush in, but Jenny was no, got on top of her and was no, and she's I'm sorry. I guess for her it's just she felt like she was going a little too aggressive. I get it, you're in pain, because she was looking for her child, Robbie. But it turns out the person she was staying with, Ed, ended up being the victim. But it turns out there is a wound on him, a gunshot wound. So now it's a situation at first that's kind of okay, was it murder? Immediately, the moment we got introduced to Claude, I was did Claude do it? Because obviously there's something between Claude and Kelly, the mom, and I was thinking maybe because of that, I was so did he read the situation as a situation of I thought maybe he kidnapped Robbie, because it's I'm gonna keep him safe, we're gonna be happy together. I killed Ed because he wasn't a good person. That's what I was thinking. I was because especially later on, because even Jenny's looking at it interesting. And then Claude was coughing a little bit. You're what's up with that? Because he says it's from him, trying to help put out the fire. Because obviously he'd done a lot of maintenance around the building. It's the building being, kind of as low down, messed up as it was, and him kind of doing kind of literally repairing everything with kind of tape and stuff, doing as much maintenance as he could. It wasn't, the place wasn't up to par, and so that's why the place ended up going up in the fire so quickly, and obviously later on there's the garden situation. So at first it's kind of okay, Jenny starts thinking that, because eventually they start thinking the reason why we haven't found Robbie's body is because maybe he was kidnapped. And so they start looking at Claude, and because obviously Jenny learned from from her therapy session that maybe she might not be looking at everything the way she should be. And so they go to the garden, and they sadly do find Robbie's body. And they also find Claude, but he's dead. I'm did someone murder him? It's no, he died from because he had already had I think because he had asthma on top of inhaling all that smoke, it ended up killing him. So I was did he do that? So did he kill Robbie? What? Because the moment she touched Robbie, she was his ribs are cracked, and I immediately was I immediately took that as because that's a thing that can happen when you try to do CPR, especially because a baby is small and kind of frail. So I was thinking maybe that's what happened. Maybe Claude was trying to save its life. But what we end up actually finding out is that Kelly was actually going to leave Ed. Ed found out. He found the suitcase. He kind of snapped. Now, whether it was by an accident or, just in a fit of rage, he ended up killing Robbie, couldn't live with it, and ended up killing himself because the gunshot wound they found, because Jenny has Dwayne look into it, and it turns out there's a chip of his tooth in his mouth, and it's because it's from him putting a gun in his mouth. So it was self-inflicted. He killed himself. He had set up the room to kind of burn down just because he was just so oh my God, what have I done? Because the sad thing is, because obviously for Kelly, Robbie was kind of her everything, and obviously it's she was kind of in a bad luck of things, but then she met Ed and things were good, but then obviously now you see things kind of spiraled out to this, and obviously she blames herself. It's that sad moment of Jenny giving her that moment with Robbie, and it's so sad seeing her kind of caressing it. It's that's so heartbreaking, because there was a part of her that's you've never found my baby, so she's I'm going to hold on to hope. And sadly Jenny was holding on to hope too, because even Donovan was we always knew there was a chance we weren't going to find him alive, but Jenny was holding on to it because it's just a life that young snuffed out. And it's just especially it's because as a mom, a single mom, because obviously despite the Ed in her situation, it's like she was still a single mom raising a kid, so she understood. I'm sure when she looks at Kelly, she kind of saw herself a little bit, and it's just like, she wanted to help Kelly out. She wanted to be able to give her a happy ending, and sadly that wasn't possible in this situation. It's like sad and super depressing, because now she's kind of blaming herself, being like, if she knew, like, it's like for her, it's like she was in kind of a rough place at the time when she met Ed. Ed helped her, and it's like she built a life for herself. So it's to the point, like, she felt like, because her and Ed getting together, she even questioned, like, did I even love him to begin with? Like, maybe I just latched onto him because of what the safety and comfort that he gave me and Robbie. And it's like, if I'd known he was capable of that, because for her, she's like, that bag was in there for like months and he never saw it until the day I packed and got ready to go, and that's what set this all in motion. But Jenny's like, no, he's the one that did this. You shouldn't be angry. Don't take this out on yourself. Be angry at him. But she's like, I'm not angry. I don't feel anything, and it's just like, it's a rough and sad situation, especially when you combine that with like what Jenny's kind of been going through this episode. Obviously, like, because I'd said like everything was kind of wrapped up from last season, but it's like, no, obviously Jenny's still dealing, obviously it came out, obviously the whole thing about her accidentally killing her sister, but obviously that's still a lot she's got to unpackage. So obviously you can tell she holds some resentment towards her dad, because like when her dad is trying to, he's trying to keep his driver license. He's like, oh, I've been driving for like 50 years. He gets into it with the dude. Jenny ends up getting hit at the same time, and it's just like, okay. And I love that she's like, Dad, lean your nose forward. He's like, no, you got to lean back. Like, everyone knows it. It's like, yeah, ignore your daughter who has medical training and knows exactly what she's talking about. And he's like, what, are you mad at me or something? And she's like, yeah, I'm going to go see my therapist. He's like, yeah, go ahead and talk to him, because that's the only person you talk to. Because I think whether she wants to admit it or not, it's hard to probably talking to her dad anymore, because it's like, not only did I kill, my sister, you've lied about it my entire life. You tried to cover it up. And I think there's probably a little bit of resentment she holds towards him because of that, whether she'll really kind of admit it or not. But her therapist has her trying, because obviously this all started because Liam was also like, hey, you're popping those pills a lot, aren't you? And it's like for her an anxiety, but it's becoming like more and more of a crutch. And even her doctor is saying like, how many have you taken? She's like, 6. I took like an extra one. It's like, no. She's like, I'm healing, because he's telling her to live in the trap. Like, she needs to go back to that traumatic moment to figure out how she felt, because by figuring that out, it's part of this, the healing process. You need to kind of uncover the truth about yourself back then, kind of feel how you felt back then, so that you can heal now. And because it's that thing, I'm not a trained therapist, so I can't be like, oh, it's kind of fucked up to make someone relive their trauma. It's like that. It's probably the steps to heal. Once again, I'm not a trained professional, so I have no idea what goes into that, but it's obviously it's not an easy thing, and no one ever said it would be. So he's obviously trying to prescribe her some different medication, but she's like, no, I'm fine. But obviously it's like a thing of like, just because you see things one way doesn't mean that they are. Like, there's something basically saying that, I think it's like, I forgot, because the whole analogy was about a train, so I think it was kind of like, there is another train there. Basically, it's like, oh, move this train and there's another train. So there's something underlining there that you're not 100% dealing with. She's kind of scared to deal with, because she doesn't want to go. Because the moment it's like making her relive it, he was like, yeah, when you pushed your sister, she's like, could you please not say that? He's like, but that's what happened. We know that that's the truth now. Like, denying it is not going to do anything. It's not going to help you heal. So we have to live with the fact that is the truth that's to happen. I get it. It hurts. But that's the point. Like, this is on your road to recovery. And that means facing that trauma and, confronting that trauma, Especially because this is trauma it's always been there, and it's manifested itself in different forms. But obviously now the truth. It's like, now the truth is out there. You can find a way to conquer it and kind of, heal and process and deal with it all. I think it's actually kind of interesting, because in its own right, like, everyone's kind of dealing with their own trauma in this, Liam as well as Ross. Because let's go with the Ross situation. Obviously, it's like, oh, they're congratulating, because he'll be going off to college and stuff soon. But we end up finding out from his boyfriend, it's like, oh, Ross didn't graduate. He's just been lying to his mom. And he's like, oh, no, I'll move in with you. But his boyfriend's like, no, I have a roommate. He's like, oh, so you're break up? He's like, no. The thing is, all you've been doing, like, ever since your dad died, obviously it's hit you hard to the point that you're latching on to people and trying to copy their lives. You try to become a carpenter and you latched on to Liam. Now you're talking all this stuff about law and stuff like that because that's what I'm going to study. It's like, what do you want is what he basically is telling Ross to figure out, you know? And I love that both of them kissing and everything. And he's just like, you sound like my mom. And he's like, I was about to kiss you again until you mentioned your mom. I was like, that's kind of a funny moment between them. But it's this thing of like Ross, much like both Liam and Jenny, all of them are kind of like trying to grasp at anything that they can to kind of like weather this storm of just how it's almost like you're latching onto someone to kind of, I think that all kind of like plays a little bit into like Kelly's story, in this episode as well, I just think that's just kind of an interesting aspect to it. And, kind of circling to Liam, he's talking to his buddy, which is interesting because lo and behold, who's his buddy? It's the actor who played 4, a.k.a. Rio in Dark Matter, which is interesting when you remember the actor who plays McAvoy played 6 in Dark Matter. So once again, I've been seeing that more and more recently, and I always think it's just always interesting when you see actors who were together in a previous show, even though they're not in the same scenes together, just the fact is you're in the same show. It's a small world, but it's just always neat when that happens. Now I'm sitting here thinking about it. It's been a while. I don't even remember 6's real name. I remember some of the group's real name, like Portia and Boone and Rio, for example. Regardless, I'm going on tangents and stuff like that. It doesn't matter. But because basically there's a whole thing with Liam being around Jenny, like when he smelled that fire on her, he's like, it reminded him of like an IED going off because he was talking to his friend about the fact is obviously there being triggers in life that kind of remind them of their time over there. And obviously for Liam, he's happy because he's living in with a girlfriend, and even his buddy was like, yeah, you're kind of moved away from living in that tree, you're moving in with your lady and her son. He's like, yeah, it's a lot of moves, it's a lot of big moves, so obviously it's going to be kind of a lot of big changes, so it's not going to be like the quickest turnaround of like, being adjusted, but it's just like, it's like, it's good for you, so I'm happy for you. But obviously you see Liam, I think, kind of worried about it because it's just like, because I guess Jenny's kind of worried about being weird. I think he's kind of worried about the same thing too. So it's like, none of them are completely over their trauma. It's still a long-lasting thing, and like neither one of them is really communicating to the other about what they're really going through. Because Jenny notices it from time to time when she'll say something. Like obviously she showed him the bullet. She's like, "Oh, does this look like a gunshot?" And he was like, "Yeah," and he got a little like, because obviously like she's kind of done that before, where she threw some crime scene stuff in front of his face, and it just makes him think of a time he doesn't want to think about. And even Jenny later on, when she's talking to him later on, she's apologizing because she's like, she thinks she's messed up because she's like, me showing that photo to you and everything, and she was just kind of like, she's like, I pushed my sister down the stairs. She's like, please just don't leave me. So it's a thing of like, she's kind of latching onto him. But then at the same time, like they do their thing. I was like, oh, I guess that was kind of like some like, fully like in our feels, emotional, like sex. And then it's like, they're trying to cuddle up, but they're like, it's just awkward because like he's trying to adjust to her, but she's kind of pushing away from him. And it's like, okay, never mind. But both of them are like wide awake about it. So it's just, it almost feels like there's one step forward, but then it's like 2 steps back. Because Jenny talks about the fact that she didn't want to feel what the doctor was telling her to feel. She's just like, I just don't want to feel that, And I think Liam can understand that too, just because he doesn't want to feel what he's feeling, So I think it's just kind of a lot of interesting aspects of just kind of like different forms of trauma and just how each of these characters is kind of handling said trauma, And then on top of that, we have Jenny like sleepwalking because she wakes up from her dream and she's in the refrigerator, and it's like, wait, what? They even had this little thing too where I should also really quickly note that like they had talked about the fact that she was asking Liam, did he think it was like, is Ross being okay with the fact that they've moved in together? And it's like, he's like, have I moved in? She's like, well, you spend less time in your tree, so maybe that's the thing of like, maybe that's all, going back to it, maybe a sign, maybe things are going too fast, maybe this is, I mean, who knows in the long run? It just depends on just how things kind of work out, like with their respective situations, as well as being together with their respective situations and what that kind of means for them individually and as well as for them as a couple. But regardless, circling back to what I was saying, is like her whole sleepwalking situation. Because obviously she was having that first nightmare about the hallway and the fire and everything. So you're like, okay, so this is specifically tied to the case. But then she has to dream again, and it seems like it is specifically that room, but she's standing there watching the fire. So I'm thinking like maybe it's like this particular case manifested itself. Her issues manifested themselves in the form of that room. I mean, it might be the thing of like her brain trying to tell her something. You know, maybe it's something from the case that her mind is trying to get. Because, like, it's also interesting because, like, kind of circling back to what I brought up at, like, the beginning, her trying to stop Kelly from going in the house, and she's like, sorry. Like, maybe it stems from, you know, maybe there's something there psychologically. Like, maybe stopping Kelly is her own way of stopping herself in some shape or form. Because I guess for her, it's like, when she looked at Kelly, she saw herself. It's like, there's nothing you can do. Just stop. Like, because obviously maybe after, you know, whole David situation, she was spiraling. Maybe the same thing happened when she was a little girl, when she accidentally killed her sister. But, you know, it's like, because obviously season 1, everything manifested itself as the dog. The dog was kind of like the key sign. Maybe this is too. Because it's interesting, now that she's no longer seeing the dog, all of a sudden she's sleepwalking. So it makes you wonder, like, okay, so is this sleepwalking the replacement for the dog? Because obviously she's not really, like, the trauma is there and she's fully awakened it, and now, like, her mind is trying to tell her something that maybe she isn't quite listening to, much like the dog, but now this has taken on a much more dangerous, because obviously she was hallucinating before, you know, her mom was trying to show her something, but now it's like you're full-blown sleepwalking, almost getting hit by a car at the end, you know? So, like I said, I'm curious if that room being on fire, like, is that just particularly from, is it her drawing this from the case and, you know, her trauma and just what she's not really dealing with, all that feelings? It's, I mean, because immediately my brain was like, fire, I assumed it was supposed to is it supposed to represent rage? Is that what she feel? Is that the emotion she felt after her sister, after she did what she did? You know, I mean, you're not trying to judge her. She was a little girl, but it's like all that obviously messed Jenny up, and obviously she feels a little messed up because of all that. So, and there's also another little tiny subplot we didn't really get into. All of a sudden, Dwight's leaving. Not Dwight, I said Dwight. Dwayne is leaving at the end of the episode, and he, like, River's like, "Aren't you going to say anything?" He's like, "No, goodbyes aren't really my thing." To be fair, I think probably ever since Peterson, I mean, I think it's probably always been there, but I think Peterson probably was the broke the camel's back, you know, in that, you know, using that metaphor, because I think that was it was a little too close home, because remember, he says he tries to separate personal life from professional, and I think for him it's just like the lines blurred too much, and it's just kind of like it just hit him a little too home. And I think maybe after after that episode, I mean, who knows, like, how much time is necessarily in between that the season 1 finale and this premiere. Like, obviously it's been a good chunk of change of time, but still, it didn't necessarily specify. But I'm curious, are we going to see him pop up anymore? I guess there's going to be someone who pops up to replace Dwayne, or maybe it's just going to be River that kind of takes over that role more. I mean, who knows in the grand scheme of things. We also touched on, obviously, Allison had her kid, you know, and her hiding some of the, what was it? She was freezing some stuff in the fridges that they keep the brains or something like that. And she's like, well, it's the only place I can do it. So, you know. But a lot of interesting, insightful stuff to kind of get at the beginning of the season. So I'm really curious to see ultimately where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.